Oh, this is Dr. Ford again. Welcome to all. Today we're going to be talking about international trade and particularly about comparative advantage. International trade has been a benefit to this country. What I mean by a benefit, what I mean is very clearly that we live better. Things cost us less. We have a more diverse product line. And so we have a big advantage from trade. However, trade has not been well handled by this country. We were a country that exported more than we imported up till 1975. Unfortunately, since 1975, we have had a deficit in our trade balance with other countries every year. This has been a big enough issue that Donald Trump wrote it to victory, partially what it did to victory. And then after he became president, started a trade war with China, which he lost because their national trade deficit actually increased, and to a degree with Europe. Well, it's more of a skirmish with Europe than a major battle. But it is a concern. So the question emerges, why do we trade? What is it that we trade? What is that advantage? Well, one of the first advantages, it helps us in terms of having a diverse product. Some things it's just hard to produce here. It is hard to produce coffee in America. Oh, we can produce some in Hawaii, but not much. Tea's the same thing, bananas, mangoes, lettuce during the winter. That's a difficult one. Almost certainly a wide variety of products during winter months. We enjoy these. They make our life better. Some things just aren't available at all. We don't have much titanium in this country. We don't have very many rare minerals. We're trying to develop some of those capabilities. But if we want those and want color televisions, and we want light golf clubs or well-designed airplanes, we need to import some of those things. Other countries have difficulty in terms of complicated things, such we have extremely well-developed legal system, much more than most countries. Our legal counseling to other countries is a big factor. So it's technical counseling and consulting, such as how to drill, or even just exporting the effects of advanced technology, such as advanced airplanes. So there are some, real reasons in terms of absolute advantage that we do so. We also trade for another reason, which is often not mentioned. We increasingly watch in America the number of companies shrink. We used to have like 15, 20 car companies. Now we basically have 2 domestic. Third one was Dodge and Jeep is actually owned by Italian company Fiat. Same thing has occurred with computers and a variety of other types of things. We only have, 2 really major domestic carriers for wireless, and we didn't have T-Mobile, we'd have less competition. So given the consolidation of our industries into smaller and smaller, numbers of companies and in the industry, foreign competition allows for greater competition, less regulation, and probably better products and lower prices. The last thing, though, is the biggest reason, and that's what we call comparative advantage. Now, what I'm going to do is put up on the screen an example of comparative advantage. This is a real simple one, which I just created. I usually do this in class, and I don't do an advanced specific numbers. I just kind of put up some numbers and then show that it works every time. This basically illustrates the same concept that you have if you have a child that goes with you when you go camping. You don't have the child do the thing that's hard to do. You have the child do the thing that's easier, even if you could do that easier task yourself. In this case, let's just assume there are 2 countries, country 1 and country 2. And we're only concerned about 2 products, product A and product B. And for the production of these products, we have 1,000 units of labor. And we'll just have labor as kind of surrogate for all resources. Now, if originally we come here and take a look, the labor, which is always in red, is split 50-50 an original on the product line, and the original up here at the top is basically for country A, 500 and 500, because country one, rather, not A, country one can produce with 1,000 units of labor, either 1,000 products, units of A, or 1,000 units of B. But country two can't do that well. Country two can only produce 500 with 1,000 units of labor, or 200 with of B with 1,000 units of labor. They're not as efficient in either one as country number one. But country number two, originally we're going to assume, just did the same thing. They just split equal one with the other. Here's the original, 500 units of labor, 500 units of labor, and they use 250 of A and 100 of B. So what we have is production under the original, just splitting resources 50-50, 500 and 500 for country A, 500 and 500 for country B, but in country B, the product is 250 and 100, for a total down here of original product of 750. That's that 500 plus that 250. And for a grand total over here of 500 plus 100 for 600. But let's say that country number two is aware that they have a strong comparative disadvantage in producing product B. So what they do is they say down here with whatever, they shift all the resources over to produce only product A, which kicks up their production to 500 units of it, twice as much as they had before. Country country one says, hey, if country two is going to produce so much more of A, we'll take some of our resources and we'll put them over here on the other side. Okay. And what they should, they did a mistake right here. This should be here only 700. And so you take that 700, 700, what you have here is you would have the new thing would be over here 300 units. They got 300 plus the 500, they get 800 units here, increasing the production of product A by 50. This should only be 700, but you add the original, the change for the other 0, because the other country's not doing that, and you would end up with not 800, but 700 units there. There's a mistake here. This would only be 700. But look, 800 is more than the originally produced of A. 700 is going to be more than originally produced of B. And the production of this little world of two countries is higher than it would be otherwise. That's what makes trade valuable. Now, there are some other disadvantages, and most certainly these have been raised by people like, well, from people originally for a long time, and originally, currently, recently, by people like Bernie Sanders. One, of course, is the national security. If you don't produce something you need, what are you going to do in times of crisis? Well, most of these times of crisis are a pretty short period now. It's not like it was an old time period, you had wars in 6, 7 years. So most certainly that argument is not as strong. How about there's some countries say, well, we shouldn't do it because we have infant industries, and you try to compete with these other countries that have developed industries, will never get started. That's been kind of downplayed by most economists, but it actually is a valid argument. An even bigger argument, I think that you get one that's, not exactly as Bernie would argue, but most certainly the same concept, if maybe a little bit more theoretical, is what happens is you also pool labor forces. What I mean by pool is you put them together. So if you have a high income labor force and a low income labor force, and you put them together, producing the same kind of products, corporations can play the high income against the low income force wages down in the high income country to the disadvantage of workers. And of course, if they don't want to cooperate, move the jobs somewhere else. And sometimes we don't compensate for the loss of jobs very well. Instead of those people going into higher productive industries, we tend to often leave them without the skills necessary to effectively produce. How do we resolve this? Well, there's a variety. We can reduce consumption of foreign goods. We can do a little economic nationalism. If you bring a Japanese teenager over to America, they love our malls, but they'll look at the price tag of everything in the store, the country, and if it's not made in Japan, they don't buy it. We can do the same. We do now put on most products country of origin, and we could decide, oh, we just rather buy American. And when I bought solar for my house, that was a consideration. Or we can do what we're doing mainly. We can sell American. Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange is owned 60% by the Germans. Burger King's owned by an Argentine company. Increasingly, we find companies like Union Oil being owned by foreign interests. And of course, that didn't even talk about the number of stocks that previously were owned by Americans that are now owned by those who live outside our borders, effectively transferring ownership of major corporations to people who live overseas. Those are all ways we could do it. We could also let the dollar depreciate, although that's been difficult because we'll talk about more in international finance. Why? Because the dollar is an international currency. But those are kind of ways. Or the last one we could do is something that's mentioned in the second book you have, the Combos book, and in which he talks about import certificates. And import certificates mean that people have to buy American goods before they can sell to Americans. And since we import more than we export at this time, we might make the original certificates so that if they buy $1 million worth of American goods, we'll allow them to import 1.6 million to the United States, send us and sell us 1.6 million. But 10 years from now, that will change. We'll say 1 million to 1 million, and we'll have gotten rid of that deficit. But we'll have done it gradually over 10 years using market pressing so people can basically respond to market pressures to do it the most efficient way. But we'll have solved the problem in that regard without necessarily causing any kind of trade war. I hope this gives you a better understanding. This is just kind of give you a feel for what's going on in international trade. Most certainly read the modules, text, including the Combos book, very carefully. Thank you very much. Thank you.